everyone, Alexa Dunn here, and what is even happening because I am back with another video in a reasonably short amount of time, and it's another craft video. Since I've been trying to focus on whatever's sparking joy for me in terms of video topics so that I will actually sit down to film them, this one just crept up on me and I decided it was something I wanted to talk about, and that is overly mechanical writing and how you can fix it. This has come up in just a lot of writing samples I've been looking at lately. Perhaps it's because a function of my current procrastination of actually drafting another book. I am technically working on it just very slowly, but a function of my procrastination has been editing other people's work. Mostly this has been me like giving really intense line level feedback on queries and pages, on pub tips, on Reddit, but I've also been doing some CPing and just generally reading a lot. And I've just noticed in multiple avenues the same thing cropping up over and over again. And I did not invent the term mechanical prose. In fact, I'm pretty sure where I saw it was Reddit, and it was a while ago, but it really triggered something in my brain, like an aha moment, very similar to when we talked about narration versus dramatization and how that was an aha moment for me, thanks to Laini Taylor. Someone referring to a type of prose as mechanical sparked something for me of this is another way to identify and really peg when you're not connecting to prose, when writing feels off or boring or bad to some people, where there's too much telling and you're just not vibing with something. Very often it's because the writing is overly mechanical. And I say bad writing because many people find this bad writing, but I would think more neutrally about it. It's absolutely a facet of novice writing, but some would argue it's just a specific writing style. Now, I think it's a writing style that isn't particularly great, and I don't like reading it. Because the catch-22, the constant disclaimer running as an undercurrent through this video is, I think this is a problem that I'm really happy to illustrate for you and talk about and go through examples and talk about fixes. And I think that if you take this in and look at your own work, because everyone does this at certain points in their writing or as an overall trend in their writing, it's super common when you're newer to writing. If you do all of that, I think you will end up a better writer. You will write stronger line level prose, which will also support your storytelling craft better, and I promise you're gonna get better results, whether it's in querying or from reader reviews, etc. However, because I've seen the alarming to me trend of a pretty sharp uptick in massive books, huge books, bestsellers, where the writing is absolutely overly mechanical. I can't read it. I don't want to read it. I don't enjoy writing that is basically beat for beat, and then this happened, and this happened, and this happened, and spoon feeding the reader, and a lot of telling and passivity and filtering. I don't enjoy that. And I'd say a lot of readers don't enjoy that, but plenty of readers don't care. There are different kinds of readers out there, and plenty of readers don't care how a story is written. They only care about the story, and that can absolutely lead to bestsellers. And you do you if you are one of those bestsellers, or you write like this and you are looking to the bestsellers and you're like, screw Alexa Dunn, I don't have to listen to her. You don't. And if you're a reader who doesn't care about the actual literal prose on a page, that's cool too. But just because there are outliers that are hugely successful with overly mechanical writing doesn't mean that that's what one should aspire to or be complacent about, in my humble opinion. And it is a disturbing trend that I've seen in a lot of published and popular books, where the line level writing is weak and the editing therefore is weak, because here's the thing, editors can't fix weak line level writing. The author has to do it. An editor might point out a problem, but especially when the entire book, the writing style is overly mechanical, an editor, especially not at a traditional publisher, they're not gonna go line for line and show you how to write better. That is not actually their job, which means, I mean, clearly if they acquire the books and push them through, they're happy with it, but as a reader, I'm very sad. this is long and meandering, but my way of saying, if you have also noticed that there are just a lot of books out there where you can't engage with the prose, like you can't get into the book and you think it's the writing itself, it's not the story, you're not crazy. This is the anti-gaslighting video. It's not you. With mechanical writing, technically the writing on the page is fine. You look at it and you see complete sentences that are more or less grammatically sound because you can absolutely clean up mechanical writing. Copy editing will do its job with mechanical writing. It'll be relatively free of errors, but when you read it, it's purely functional. And it also tends to be full of writing crutches that are going to sound familiar to you because they're things I've talked about before on this channel or you will have seen around, which makes it a slightly complicated topic to talk about. And you know that I'm the champion of a long video, but in order to try to keep this short, I'm not gonna delve in deep into every single pitfall that is common in mechanical writing. I'm going to more help you identify overly mechanical writing and apply like 1 or 2 tips and tricks. In many ways, mechanical writing is just another way of saying telling versus showing. Telling versus showing is a bit reductive. I've talked about that before in videos. While show don't tell is a great kind of thing to throw out, it's not useful on its own because most people don't know what to actually do about it, which is why narration versus dramatization was also an aha moment for me. And mechanical writing, overly mechanical writing, is going to be a cousin to that. So this is a different way to kind of identify and approach the same problem. And as I said, it's not so much a matter of good versus bad writing, but strong versus weak writing. In my opinion, overly mechanical writing, when it's all of the writing, is weaker writing. It is harder to engage with. It's less interesting. It also tends to be less detailed. It introduces distance between the reader and the characters. It covers all manner of sin. What you want to think about is, yes, the writing is on the page. It's perfunctory. It is telling a story. But are your readers feeling anything? Can they really see what's happening with specific details? I mean, they can certainly see what's happening. If I tell you Claire walked from one side of the room to the other, I know that you can see that. And sometimes you need a line that simply says Claire walked from one side of the room to the other. Narration versus dramatization. But if an entire book is that? Well, white room syndrome is one of the pitfalls of overly mechanical writing. It's hard for a reader to visualize and really conjure up specific scenes and feelings for the writing. And the thing about those outliers, because truly I can think of half a dozen or more bestsellers in a lot of different genres where I picked them up and I looked at the writing and I was like, this is not great writing. This isn't strong. It's a little too telly for me, a little overly mechanical. Those are the ones that you see that get through, the outliers. By and large, when I am looking at writing samples for aspiring writers, people who are querying, who aren't doing well in the trenches, who are looking to kind of figure out maybe where their problem lies, very often it is weak writing. It is pedestrian line level writing. And there's a lot that goes into strengthening your line level writing, but the overly mechanical prose part is a very common thing I see. So for every outlier who gets through and becomes a bestseller, far more people aren't going to achieve what they want to achieve with their writing because it's overly mechanical. So mechanical writing is at its heart incredibly literal. Every line literally tells the reader what's happening, what people are doing, how they're feeling, though it doesn't show how they're feeling, which is a different thing, tells how they're feeling. It literally tells the reader what is happening, but also even when it doesn't literally tell the reader what is happening, it leads them. A lot of leading writing. Characters who suppose and guess and assume what other characters are thinking and feeling, having that line, and instead of actually showing something, showing us what they are seeing and why they are making that assumption. A quick example off the top of my head. Claire assumed Ethan was frustrated with her. Well, instead of writing Claire assumed, that's filtering, by the way. Why don't you have a line showing Ethan being frustrated and they can have a dialogue exchange? You can have someone say something that makes it clear that they're frustrating. There are a million different ways to address these things, and it is everything in moderation. Sometimes you just need to dash off a quick line that gets to the point, but if the entire book is like that, that's boring. Another facet of mechanical writing is repetitive sentence structure. I've seen this in a lot of books where it's just a whole lot of noun, verb, noun, verb, noun, verb, as in I said, I did, I walked, Claire jogged, Claire thought, Claire spoke, whatever. Not in all cases, but in a lot of cases, if you literally look at the lines on the page, you start to see the repetitive sentence structure. Once I point this out to you, it's going to jump out to you when you open up a book where you're like, why did I struggle with this or just thought it was mid? Very often it is repetitive sentence structure, lack of variation in that sentence structure, filtering, telling, leading the reader, white room syndrome, adverb abuse. So adverbs aren't bad, but one of the reasons we caution writers about adverb abuse, why I look to this in my own writing, adverbs can absolutely be a crutch, and I see them all the time in overly mechanical writing. I call them leading dialogue tags. This is when you add an adverb to a dialogue tag to tell the reader how someone said something. Again, everything in moderation, sometimes this is okay, but in overly mechanical writing, in concert with everything else, you're also getting dialogue tags telling you exactly how someone is doing something all the time instead of using literally any other tool or craft to better demonstrate what is happening in a scene or with a character. And what happens so often with this sort of thing, leading dialogue tags, also often with filtering, is the writer knows about show don't tell. They're actually trying to fix show don't tell. They know they need to better demonstrate to the reader like what's happening, but they go to these crutches, leading dialogue tags, filtering, etc., assuming things about other characters and leading the reader. But that is not actually showing, that's still telling. It's just more descriptive telling. A friend of mine put it perfectly. She called this reporting on a scene instead of being in a scene. And as someone who majored in journalism, I'm like, that's exactly it. So often when I see this storytelling style, this writing style, I feel like I'm being talked at. I'm being lectured. And then the characters walked across the room, and then they had a conversation. So-and-so said something angrily. It's very by rote. It's not engaging. Comparatively, if you're actually in the scene, in the perspective of whoever your character is, you're doing writing that supports feelings and tone and observation and has textural detail and things for the reader to latch onto and then extrapolate from. Really important disclaimer before we get into an example and some tips I have for actually fixing this. As with all things, moderation. Sometimes writing needs to be mechanical. Writing needs to be perfunctory. Sometimes you need to just get from point A to point B and push someone to the next thing. It's all about balance, as with literally any topic that we talk about. Adverbs, filtering, and so on. And this is why a blanket show don't tell isn't particularly useful, because everything in moderation. And also because I mentioned those show crutches, they're still telling. Essentially what you want to look for is excess, bad patterns. And it's helpful in terms of tackling it too, because you don't have to fix everything you've ever written. It's about smartly going in and looking at the balance of the writing and looking for prime spots where you can improve. It really does all harken back to that narration versus dramatization, and if you haven't watched that video, I highly recommend you do so, and I will link to it down below. It's the balance between evocative scene setting and like character work and more perfunctory narrative writing. Now, what is a craft video without some kind of example? The thing is, I do not like to use real writing examples unless I have permission from someone, so I wrote my own example. I based this example on some best-selling books that I referenced. The substance of this is nothing like any real book, but I looked at the rhythm of the sentence and some of the word choices, and so I wrote my own example. And honestly, it was kind of a struggle. And I almost wish it was worse and more obvious, but we're gonna go with it. Because I'm gonna read this to you and put the text up on the screen for those who are more visual. And then I'm going to go through just one example of how I would fix something in this writing sample. I feel so vulnerable now reading a purposefully bad example of writing. Okay. Danielle walked into the library and made a beeline for a table in the back. "Are you sure it's free? Someone left their stuff," Cleo said. "It's fine," Danielle said, shrugging. "The coffee cup is nearly empty. They probably forgot to throw it away. I do it all the time." Cleo raised an eyebrow. "You frequently litter?" Danielle panicked. "No, I didn't mean that. Just that I half drink my coffee all the time and then forget about it." She trailed off, thinking it through. "Okay, maybe I do litter sometimes. Mostly my own desk, though." Danielle smiled at that. "Well, let's get to studying." Cleo nodded and pulled out a chair, sitting down. She pulled her laptop from her backpack and turned it on. Danielle looked at Cleo's sticker-covered laptop and frowned, retrieving her own stack of books, a notepad, and a pen. Cleo probably noticed Danielle's discomfort. "We can totally share my laptop if you need to Google something or look something up on Wikipedia," she said. Danielle beamed at that. Cleo was all right for a rich girl. So the most important thing here is technically that isn't awful. I'm not happy with it. But technically those are words on a page and they're telling you something and you probably could kind of visualize that. I told you plenty of stuff. And in fact, this should literally remind you of writing you've seen in published books, including bestsellers, because again, I referenced at least 3 real examples to write this. It's fine, but it's not great. Examples I want to point out that I very much did on purpose. Obviously, I purposefully added a ton of repetition. I started a bunch of these sentences the same way. Danielle panicked. Danielle smiled. Cleo nodded. Danielle looked. Filtering. Danielle beamed, and so on. Honestly, looking at this, I should have added some leading dialogue tags. I didn't. That's my bad. But I have plenty of other stuff in here to work from. Did you notice the incredibly mechanical writing at Cleo nodded and pulled out a chair, sitting down? That's redundant. You can technically say someone pulls out a chair and sits down, but it's mechanical and kind of boring. She pulled her laptop from her backpack and turned it on. That's great. Again, on its face, not a terrible sentence, but that's 2 sentences in a row where it's like, okay, it's a little bit almost robotic. That's how I feel a lot of the time when I read mechanical writing. Da da da, da 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 da. Da, 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 da. Then the filtering. Danielle looked at Cleo's sticker-covered laptop and frowned, adding a nice leading action there. Retrieving her own stack of books, and it's not that interesting after that. Cleo probably noticed Danielle's discomfort. This is leading the reader, a supposition supported by nothing other than us trusting that the character notices something. Well, what the hell did they notice? We're all gonna come back to this when I try to fix this. I'd also like you to notice an over-reliance on bodily reactions. This is actually one of my big crutch problems in writing that I still have not conquered, and to some degree I don't think you ever truly conquer it. But I do this a lot too. A lot of nodding, a lot of sighing, a lot of smiling, and there's a lot here. I actually packed them all in, but that I have 2 specific beats of smiling. Super redundant. Just my editor would rake me over the coals for this, essentially. And also, harkening back to, it's not totally awful. There are some good ideas here. I purposefully added a little bit of fun banter. They're talking about something specific. It's a little bit revealing of character, and it's kind of potentially brewing a moment between these 2 characters. But the thing is, entire books of that. There are entire books like this where they're kind of telling you something, but it's just not getting as deep or as interesting as it could possibly be. So now let's take just one part of this. I didn't fix the whole example. I took one part of it and let's fix it. Because this is what I encourage you to do if you know that you do this, or if any of these specific crutches are your crutches. It's too overwhelming to go, oh my God, I'm a terrible writer, I have to change everything about me, because that isn't realistic. And most of the time you don't in fact have to change everything about your writing. You have to identify specific weaknesses in your writing and target them one at a time, and honestly one scene at a time. Just like improve as much as you can, and then the more mechanical stuff, the stuff that's a little weaker, it'll actually disappear among the stronger writing. And specifically, anytime you know you have a crutch, my advice is to challenge yourself to change 50% of whatever it is that you know that you're doing. So for example, I always go through my manuscripts and I look for those crutch spots where people are smiling and laughing, and I force myself to change 50% of them to something else. Though sometimes I then introduce new problems where I just use another crutch and then I have to tackle that crutch. Things with eyes, another crutch for me. But it's better to change 25% or 50% of a problem than to not tackle a problem at all. Any work you do is going to strengthen your writing, and that's good. So I have a 1-2, well, really triple punch in here. That section that I went over where it's repetitive in terms of the noun verb, it's overly mechanical. I have that awful supposition where a character tells you what they assume another person is thinking instead of giving you any context to actually lead you there yourself. And I'm gonna revise that little bit. So to revise that supposition, I have to go into the line before. Writing is like a cascade. Things in succession affect the things after them. So it's rarely just fixing one line. You often do have to kind of backtrack a little bit to fix a whole flow, a whole succession. So I started with the filtering, with Danielle looking at the sticker-covered laptop. I started there and revised to the end of the scene, just to try something a little bit different. The laptop was sleek and new, $3,000 easy, and covered in brightly colored and quirky stickers. One was a rainbow emblazoned milk carton with the text, 100% existential dread. Danielle's stomach turned sour with her own dread as she retrieved her own stack of books, a notebook and pen. She was old school, analog. Danielle mentally practiced a cool excuse, something she could quip, but Cleo cleared her throat and spoke up first. We can totally share my laptop if you need to Google something or look something up on Wikipedia, she said. With an expression so kind, Danielle didn't know whether to declare undying friendship right there or crawl under the table and hide. Cleo didn't mean to, but there was a shade of pity inherent in the offer. Danielle was used to it. This is obviously different. It's also not perfect. There's still some leading writing here. There's still some character assumption, but it's a lot more internal. You were in Danielle's head, you're privy to her thought process, and I added a lot of texture and specificity just to give the whole thing a different feel. It's not, oh, she opened her sticker-covered laptop. It's describing the laptop. It's giving like a context. Oh, it's a really expensive laptop, and Danielle's having a reaction to that. But you know, a little descriptor of the sticker to give you a character detail. I added a bit of internalization, character thought process, so that the reader can infer like this character is probably looking panicked. I didn't say she panicked, but her thoughts are spiraling a little. And then the other character reacts to it in a nice way, and I would hope that then the reader would infer, because I trust the reader to infer, oh, she jumped in to like be nice because she saw this awkward moment happening between them. So essentially, I rewrote it in a way that doesn't directly tell you what happened, but you're kind of able to pick up the undertone of the scene. And again, this is not perfect writing. This is not my best writing, but it was like a quick fix to a problem. An example of fleshing out something that was previously mechanical, that had filtering, and adding variation to the sentence style and kind of the flow so that it felt like a much more deep scene. And that was just one example. If I were tackling the scene as a whole, maybe I would leave she opened up her sticker cover laptop as is. Maybe I wouldn't flesh out that line at all and I would make different choices, because sometimes you need a quick throwaway line to get from point A to B. You can make lots of different editing choices in terms of tackling something, as long as you're generally addressing the issues of mechanical writing. Repetition, filtering, leading the reader, the reporting on a scene rather than being in the scene. Truly, I always feel so naked sharing examples with you, because like I read that back and I'm like, no, this is terrible. You're a terrible writer. That's a healthy feeling, that humility. But it's still better than the original example, right? Which brings me to sentence rhythm. I don't actually think we talk about this enough, so I just want to wax a little bit poetic about sentence variations, sentence rhythm, and the art of writing. Because something I think that comes up so often with mechanical writing, why it doesn't bother some people and it bothers others, and it's like different kinds of readers. I mentioned kind of that robot thing where it's like, I imagine that like old computer thing, was that called Pong? I'm like just old enough, but also too young. The buh and buh and buh and the back and forth, monotony. There's a monotony in overly mechanical writing where it's just kind of boring. Similar rhythm, they're all like short and basic, using the same constructions and same word choices over and over again. Or maybe the sentences are long and technically flowy, but still narrating every single thing. And so they're long sentences, but they don't actually say anything. They're ultimately vague and again, boring. And it's like your eyes just glaze over. Good writing has variation. Good writing has a rhythm and a flow, like it's lyrical, and that doesn't mean it's all purple and beautiful. Simple writing can be lyrical and beautiful. It's word choice and kind of the variation in how you tackle a moment. In that example, the variation of, okay, I'm going to jump into some internalization here to kind of flesh out an idea without having to tell the reader and lead the reader as much. That's just one example. I'm a writer who likes internalization, those like little moments, but it breaks up the flow and it does something a little bit different in a scene that's otherwise feeling really mechanical. It is varying short staccato sentences with longer ones. It's balancing sometimes the more mechanical rote stuff with an interjection every so often of just like a beautiful paragraph of scene setting, like pausing every so often to ground the reader in a moment, in a sense of place or a feeling. That's writing. I love that as a reader, and I endeavor to do that as a writer because I want to be a better writer, and I'm still on a continuum of fixing my shit because it doesn't always come naturally to me. Though really, how natural is art? The weird thing of writing is sitting down and in a very deliberate way creating art. And it's the dichotomy of like, we expect creativity to just flow out of us and like, you know, have it be easy, but it's not always easy. It actually takes deliberate effort to create something interesting. And my thing with overly mechanical writing is it doesn't have the art in it for me. And something that I think goes along with this, and you're like, oh my God, she's talking about art and why she loves writing. Yes, but this is the crux of why some people like mechanical writing or don't mind it, and others can't read it, hate it, and endeavor to not do it in their own writing. And I call it, and this is also a tip for fixing your work, sentence variation, repetition, think about flow and rhythm. Yes, the dance of details. What I see so often in mid-writing, we'll just call it mid-writing for a little while, where you pick up a book and you're like, it's vague. It's often very vague. It's lacking the specificity of details. I go on and I call it texture a lot of the time, but that's what it is. When you are applying the fix, it's slowing down, dialing in, and thinking about how can I texturize this moment with details to add flavor and specificity, whether it's of character or place or mood or tone. So in overly mechanical writing, you want to look for those spots where you're saying something, you're stating something, but it's not actually supported in the text, and a reader can go, okay, where? You're telling me something about a character, but when has that character ever done something like that? Very often, the leading writing of overly mechanical writing feels non sequitur. It'll just tell you something out of the blue and it's not supported otherwise by the text, essentially. And that's because the text is lacking the dance of details. The places where you flesh something out, add description or specific touch points, and where you don't. Going back to my not super stellar, but slightly better than the original example, that's why I added just a teeny tiny detail about the laptop being expensive, $3,000, easy, or the tiny detail I described a specific sticker. And it could be anything, but that gives you like a little hint to who would pick that sticker, who would put that sticker on their laptop, and that gives you something. Heck, even putting stickers on a laptop might tell you about a character. I have two examples for this, not ones I wrote, you're welcome. One was a recent writing sample I saw on Reddit where the text told me that some character that the main character was observing, and there was long paragraphs telling us stuff. It said they utterly lacked charm. And I stopped and went, oh, really? Because nothing in the text, in the scene that I was reading, demonstrated that at all. There was, in fact, no showing whatsoever of the character being observed doing literally anything. I had gotten description of what they looked like, but that doesn't demonstrate to me that they utterly lack charm. And it's honestly quite uninteresting to just simply tell me that a character utterly lacks charm. And so the advice that I gave to the writer to do a revision, have a whole like active scene set piece. It can be short, it can be a few lines. Show this character coming into a room and, you know, snapping rudely at someone or dismissing someone with a sneer. Like, have something happen, literally anything happen, so that when your character observes that they are utterly charmless, it is supported by the text. And in general, in that writing sample, which I wouldn't say was overly mechanical, but was heavy on telling, that would take something that was more of an info dump of a character telling us a bunch of stuff about other people, and instead would create an active, engaging scene that the reader felt they were in, reporting on the scene versus being in the scene. My next example actually demonstrates a pitfall of something I suggested as a tool, which harkens again to everything in moderation and that everything is a dance. Internalization can also work against you, especially in first person. If you are overly in a character's head, you can still have really mechanical writing because you're actually using that as a crutch for the character in their head to tell the reader everything that you want the reader to know. So I was CPing a friend's middle grade, and I noticed this in the first chapter of the middle grade. We're very much in the main character's head. It's seen on the bus. There's nothing wrong with the scene on the bus. But there was one line that just really jumped out at me. And it was this character assuming that a girl sitting in front of her on the bus probably didn't even know her name. Now, I'd read far enough in the book to have context for the story. She's relatively new at school. She's definitely feeling socially ostracized. The girl is older and a lot cooler than she is. And I could tell that the function was to establish her as maybe like a little bit awkward and establish facts in the setup. But you kind of skimmed past it and it was a throwaway line. But the note that I gave was, can you actually contextualize this? Can you turn this into something that's a little bit more active on the page, essentially showing us instead of telling us something? And so it turned into a really good, longer interaction with this other character with a dance of a little bit of telling. Their lockers are next to each other at school, but adding like a slightly more engaging, like 2 or 3 line flashback of a locker interaction to contextualize her a bit. Then they talk longer on the bus. She actually gets her name wrong. So instead of the character going, she probably doesn't even know my name, she actually gets her name wrong. Then the character in her head contextualizes that for the reader, which gives you all of that really juicy information of she's new at school, what her name actually is, because she corrects the name in her head. Otherwise her name wasn't on the page for like 20 pages. But my friend also took this opportunity to sit more in the character's kind of feelings in this moment. But just a couple of small line level changes to flesh out one moment strengthened the entire chapter. I was really in the scene. I was in that seat on the bus with the character, and it's relatively technically such a small fix, but it's a great example of how you can look at your own work and go, okay, I'm being told this, or I'm telling this to the reader, but why? What can I do to add active scene setting to make this far more engaging and illustrative for the reader? And this honestly is something that I do all the time when I'm drafting and when I'm revising. Sometimes when I'm drafting, you know, I'll write something one way. You barf it out of your brain, and then you pause and you go, I didn't quite get across what I was trying to say, and I definitely relied a little bit on a crutch. I'm a little overly mechanical here, and I'll just challenge myself to rewrite it in the moment, to either go back a tiny bit and like flesh it out or recontextualize, or sometimes you're just phrasing in a different way so it's at least a slightly more interesting way of telling something. But it's about constantly interrogating your own line level work and not settling for just good enough. Because again, to me, that's the art of writing, because writing is an art. Writing is also a skill, but it's absolutely an art. And I think that doing this work to interrogate your line level writing, especially if it is more on the basic side, this is one way that you can concretely work to improve your writing. I really hope this was helpful. This one, as I have blathered on about, is kind of a tricky one to talk about, because I think this is a problem. This is something that I certainly endeavor not to do in my own writing, but I also have to recognize that it doesn't bother everyone. And there are plenty of examples, outliers that people can point to and say, well, that's not the greatest writing in the world, and that's published, and that's a bestseller. What the hell do you know? You're not a bestseller. I know, right? At the end of the day, we're writers, and we're always striving to improve ourselves. We want to create work that people connect to bring them story that people can love. But on the more practical side, you know, we want to get published and we want to get read, whether you're facing gatekeepers, agents, and editors, or if it's just reaching more readers and getting better reviews. Regardless of your publishing path, I think looking at how mechanical your writing is and thinking about show versus tell, and, you know, a problem with telling in terms of mechanical writing, I think this can definitely help. It's absolutely helped me to give better editorial notes when I'm helping others. It helps me when I look at my own work. It makes me reflect on my work and how far I've come in terms of line level writing, and also how far I still have to go. But yeah, thinking about mechanical writing, nice little aha moment for me. I hope this was helpful to you too. I've mentioned a lot of things that will absolutely help you improve your mechanical writing. So like a short and not exhaustive list of craft related things that you can look to if you think that you have a problem with this. Filtering, crutch words, including adverbs, and filtering. Filtering can also, those can be crutches. Crutch words and phrases. Leading dialogue tags, so that's like using adverbs in your dialogue tags to lead the reader as to how they should be feeling or how they should interpret something. Over-reliance on repetitive or leading bodily action. It's another one that I suffer from. Just watch for the balance of things like stomachs turning over and cheeks blushing and all those sorts of things. Repetitive sentence structure, verb choice, like word choice in general is absolutely a big one. Repetition and kind of like more vague language choices absolutely are going to impact how things are read. White room syndrome is another big one. And then finally, narration versus dramatization, which is just another way of thinking about the issue of weaker or more basic passive telling writing, and kind of tackling the problem. I think it's kind of like a concert series, you know, narration versus dramatization, and like thinking about overly mechanical writing, especially with like filter words and repetitive writing. It's like all of these, they make a cake. You know, I love cake metaphors. You know, I love cooking metaphors. All of these things kind of go into a bowl and they rise in the oven, and they can lead to, you know, books where you just have writing where it's perfunctory, It's on the page, it technically does its job, but it's not great. So yeah. What I want to know down below in the comments, this is very much my own personal view of the issue of mechanical writing, overly mechanical writing as an offshoot of telling too much. Have you noticed this too? Are there any things that I kind of didn't mention that go part and parcel with this? We love a good craft discussion down in the comments because writing is a community and figuring our stuff out and improving is largely a communal activity. As always, guys, thank you so much for watching and happy writing.